later. So everybody, welcome officially to Something Major Presents Ask Me Anything, everything you needed to know this year about getting a new job. I am so excited to be here with my dear friend and colleague, my longtime collaborator and partner in crime, Johnny Guidry, who I will introduce properly in just a minute. But before we go any further, I want to take a minute and introduce myself and welcome you all. For those of you who are new here, my name is Randy Braun. I am an executive coach, I am an author, and I am the proud founder of Something Major, the community, the platform, the company that is hosting today's event. We just celebrated 5 years of empowering women to thrive in their lives and their careers. And this is not just our first free live event in our 5th year, but it's our first free live event since I've been back from maternity leave. So thank you so much for joining us. And I'd love to hear where all of you are joining us from today. So if you could just pop in the chat, where are you joining us from today? I know Johnny and we're joining from our respective homes in Washington, D.C., and we'd love to hear where you're joining from. It is always amazing to see where people are dialing in from. We've had people join live from Australia, from basically every continent except Antarctica, but maybe we'll change that. So it looks like we have just about every time zone represented. We have folks from the DC area, Rockville, Maryland, Arlington. We have someone dialed in from Costa Rica. Pura Vida, baby, whoever is joining in Costa Rica. If you've never been to Costa Rica, that's a very Costa Rica thing to say, Pura Vida. We've got Dallas, we've got Michigan, we've got Rochester, Princeton, New Jersey, all over the place. So we're thrilled to have you all. Thank you so much. This is going to be a super interactive conversation, really about truly everything that you need to know about getting a new job this year. You know, getting a new job is very opaque and can feel very overwhelming. And my goal is that you leave here in the next 55 minutes with tools to make it easier and to frankly downright demystify the process. And to do that, I'm going to be sitting down today with my dear colleague, Johnny Guidry. Johnny, welcome. We are so excited to have you back.
Oh, this is thrilling. Thank you so much. It's, this is a passion of mine, helping people understand that, like Elle Wood says, the rules of job search are simple and finite. It's really something that can be learned how to navigate. And I'm really happy that I can help people do that.
I love the way that you put it. If you've never met Johnny before, if you've never been to a Something Major event, you should know we're going to have fun today. This is obviously a serious topic, but it doesn't have to feel heavy. It doesn't have to feel overwhelming. For those of you who have never met Johnny before, Johnny is an extraordinary coach. He worked in HR and learning development at many of the companies that you know, from Bloomingdale's to some of the finest hotels in the world. Years ago, I met Johnny in coach training, and a few years after that, I basically begged him. I was like, please come work with me on my team because he is the absolute best at career transition. And after years of sending my own clients and frankly, my own loved ones to him, to coach with him and help their career dreams come true, Johnny joined the Something Major team. I don't even know how many years ago it was, which is a great sign of how wonderful our partnership's been going. And he's really our go-to resource for all the women we work with who are looking to make a career pivot on things like their resume, gaining career clarity, your interview skills, your networking. And so this is going to be a dynamic conversation. I'm basically here to pick Johnny's brain with you and for you. And to that end, I'm going to jump into my questions in a moment, but I want to encourage you to use that Q&A box liberally. You showed up live. This is your time. We want to take your questions. We're going to cover things like resume, interview, networking, all the good stuff. And we want to make sure if you have a question that we get to it. So Johnny, let's just jump right into it. I think one of the hardest parts about, as my husband would say, sticks in to get thinking about getting a new job is that sometimes we know that we need something new, but we don't know what it is we're looking for. We just know that what we're doing right now isn't working.
Yeah.
So if we know we want something new, but we don't have a lot of clarity about what the next step could be or should be, just right off the bat, how do we start to gain that clarity? Because that's really step one.
Listen, there are some really simple ways that we can get to the root of this. One of the exercises that I love to do with clients is to have you think back to when you were a little kid. What is it that you wanted to do for a living, right? Because we had sometimes these very bold dreams of I want to be president, or I want to be an actor, or I want to be an astronaut. And you know what I've found over and over and over again with clients is that the values that selected those big, bold occupations still are active today. So, for example, I used to want to be an actor and I used to want to be president. These were two things that I always told people that I wanted to do. Well, today, one of the things that lights me up the most is being on stage in front of people, doing keynotes and delivering workshops. So, when I think about like some of the skills that make a president successful, it's the ability to move people with words. When I think about what makes an actor successful, it's about being able to establish rapport and connection, through presence. And these are things that I still rely on today. So that's one clue I recommend you looking at. What did you want to do when you were a kid? And are you tapping into those values today in your career? If not, what other types of roles might do that for you? Another important exercise that can help demystify this is for you to make a list of all the facets of a career, everything from commute to work-life balance to job structure, whether you're supervising individuals or whether you're an individual contributor, geography, all of these things, and determine for yourself, what are your red lines? What are the lowest acceptable factors for each of these things? And that can help to remove entire swaths of jobs that might seem reasonable, but really don't meet your needs. There's a ton of things that we could do. It doesn't mean these are things we should do. So let's just get clear about what we expect and need right now. I need to have weekends off, or I need to make over 140,000, or I need to manage people, or I need to be in a collaborative office environment, or I won't be happy. Like, let's get super honest about that stuff and use that to eliminate what doesn't work.
I think that that's so important. It's so funny. I see the women who are on the chat. We can see you, but because it's webinar. What I noticed is that so many of these women, like, they're so high performing. They're such leaders in their workplaces. They're such movers and shakers on their teams and in their communities. And what I find too, Johnny, and the women that we work with, is they almost need like a permission structure to be able to sit down and take that time. I find with high performing women, we are so good at crushing everyone else's goals and dreams. And we know we need a new job. And it's so simple. Like, when is the last time you actually sat down, sorted through it, wrote it down, figured it out? I feel like for me, so much of the battle when I'm trying to do something new is just getting the idea out of my head, or carving out the time to think about it when I'm not just washing my hair and have that like 30-second lather, rinse, repeat moment of not being in front of my computer or putting the kids to sleep, right? And so I think taking out that time is so helpful. And I also think the permission, I know this is something you work with a lot with women, is to feel bold to make a pivot. One of the things that I find is that a lot of us stay in careers that we're really good at for a variety of reasons. Like, we feel like it's too late to start over. We feel like there's nothing else that we could do. We feel like we'll never make that much money, right? I know a lot of the women who are joining us here today, they're huge financial contributors in their homes, if not the breadwinner. And so, like, what are some things that you would suggest to women to help them find the courage to make a leap or make a pivot that feels stretchy when starting over feels impossible?
Listen, there is no doubt that it is one of the scariest things to do. So much of our confidence and our perceived power comes from the way we can contribute in the workplace. In the workplace, I have authority, I have title, there are rules and policies. So I have this nice sandbox that I can come in and kick butt in, and I get to feel like a star because I contribute at a high level. The rest of life is crazy, and I don't have control over that. So the idea of jumping from that safe sandbox to something unknown is terrifying. And I think it's important to get to really understand that it takes a toll. Here's a truth that I have discovered. Guys are groomed, men are groomed in the workplace to believe that they can try new things and be successful. Right. So Chad and Todd and Brock are over there, and like this opportunity comes up in the workplace, and they're like, dude, I saw a documentary on that one time. I'm totally qualified. And like, I literally, it's the truth. As a white guy, I have been told from my earliest years, you can do anything. And women, what I find, because most of my clients, 75% of my clients are female, women are like, well, I didn't complete my PhD dissertation defense, and so I don't think I can apply for that. What? Like, you are an expert. Like, you are a superpower when it comes to A, B, and C. Jump, take the leap, apply for it, right? Stop waiting for you to get like a papal, documentation that you're worthy of this. Like, no, if you're interested and if you have some sort of related connection there, apply for it. You know what? I can trust that other company or the other decision maker to weed me out if I'm not a fit. I don't need to weed myself out. That's not how it
It's
works.
so true. We negotiate against ourselves so often. And I want to attach two lightning round questions to this before we move on to another topic. We got one question when we're thinking about looking for a new job that was, okay, how do I think about stepping out of that sandbox if I'm in a toxic environment or if I'm under duress? Maybe my company got acquired. Maybe I work here in Washington and I'm impacted by all the changes that are happening in the administration. How do we think about looking for a new role? If it has to be, this person used the word under duress. And Johnny, this might be a separate question, but we got another one about, how to build relationships with headhunters. So maybe let's take this question about leaving under duress. Let's talk about the best ways to think about building relationships with headhunters. And then I want to move on to resume. So we have a lot of ground to cover, and keep sending your questions because we want to answer them all.
Okay, so thinking about a new role, if you're in a difficult or toxic environment. So,
or you're laid off and you need the money. Like, you don't have time to sit around for 6 or 12 months to, wait for the next perfect role.
Okay. So that's really simple. Listen, if right now is not the right moment for you to make a big pivot because you have financial instability in your life or whatever the case, then stay where you are, like do the same type of role that you've been doing, and let's just put a plan on paper for when it is right, and let's start closing all of those little gaps now. So maybe it's an 18-month plan, maybe it's a 36-month plan, maybe it's a 10-year plan. It doesn't matter. But if you don't put it on paper, you'll never go. Right? You'll stay there forever. So yes, maybe right now my child has special medical needs. I can't give up these benefits and like I can't include that instability in my family life right now. But I'm going to put down a 4-year plan right now. What is it that I need to do in order to get this next job in a new field? Maybe I need certifications, maybe I need education, maybe I need to expand my network, maybe I need to work on building experiences in my current role that can be lateral, that can apply to that. And I can be proactive in bridging that gap over whatever period of time I need.
Johnny, the reverse. Like, what happens if I found out yesterday I'm being laid off and I need a new job, like ASAP? Especially, we know the more senior that we are, the longer and the harder it is to get a new job. And I know that's where this audience skews today, right? That the 36-month plan can be great for some of the women on this call. And then for some of them, what's scary is that the job that they want only comes open twice a year, once every 2 years. So, how do we let, perfect not be the enemy of good when we're under duress on one hand, but not kind of self-sabotage and sign up for something that's below us on the other hand? How do you advise clients to handle that balance?
Treat yourself the way a corporation would treat itself. Okay, let's take this problem and let's break it down into its parts and let's say what makes sense. Okay, like what risk can we tolerate? What needs do we have immediately? If I need a job now, then if I think of myself as FedEx, if I'm struggling financially now, then maybe this fiscal year is not when I'm going to launch a completely new revolutionary branch of the business. Maybe this year I'm going to double down on what I can deliver strongly and I'm going to stabilize myself, right? So break this problem into its parts, look at it the way a corporation would look at it, and do that because corporations take care of themselves and we don't. We need to really apply that logic.
It's so true. And sometimes, I know one of the things that we both talk about with clients when they're in really tough situations is like, you have to think about where you're going as your destination. And sometimes you're stuck in an unpredicted traffic jam. And sometimes you just like have to like roll the dice and get off at a different exit, stop in for McDonald's for a milkshake and hope that by the time you're ready to get back on the highway, the traffic has cleared a little bit.
Yes.
So I hope that, I think as women, we hold ourselves to such a high standard about
Yes.
everything being so perfect. And I think sometimes, we have to be in the headspace of being in information gathering mode, not decision making mode, experimentation mode, not perfection mode.
Right.
So speaking of that, I'm actually going to put a pin in Whitney's question for a minute. And Whitney, if you could pop it into the Q&A just so I don't lose track of it, that would be fabulous. I want to put a pin in the headhunter question because we're going to talk about networking in a few minutes. But before we get there, I know that, sometimes we figure out, okay, I know what I want to do. I'm open to at least a few different opportunities of what I want to do. Like I've worked in strategy operations my whole life. And now I'm thinking I might want to pursue being the CEO at a smaller enterprise, or I might actually want to go from private sector to give back in the nonprofit sector. I have a few paths, but I don't know how to update my resume because the last 4 jobs I got came to me from people in my network. I don't know how to update a resume because now I have 10, 15, 25 years of experience. Could you just give us some great do's and don'ts for, the more established professionals, the leaders that you work with, for writing an effective resume? Because I think some of the rules that we heard years and years ago about like numbers and metrics and stats, like they're important, but they don't do the kind of nuanced storytelling that you're such an expert at. Can you tell us a little bit more about why your resume should be a story, not a scorecard?
Yeah. So listen, the hardest part of this is narrowing down what you want to do. Your resume needs to push you towards an objective. And if you write a general resume, you are not qualified for a high paying job. Nobody's going to pay 6 figures for someone who can do just general things. You've got to be a specialist in something to demand high salary. So you've got to weed out, you've got to narrow it down to 1, maybe 2 options, and that's it. We don't want to have 5 different versions of our resume floating around. That's not serving you. So boil it down to what you want, make that tough decision, and then here's how you do this. You look at what are the top factors that are used for selecting an individual for that role. Maybe it is someone with merger and acquisition experience. Maybe it is someone with advanced fiscal literacy. Maybe it's someone who's managed a 7-figure budget before. Like whatever the 5 to 7 top qualifiers are for someone who's in that, who would be selected for that role. And then you need to mine through your experience to find proof that you have done those things well. Not just like, oh, I could do that, like Brock, who watched a documentary. No, like, here's where I did that. And you need to include that content in your resume. So that stuff should appear in your bullets. And also at the very top of your resume, you should include either in a summary or in a word cloud or whatever format you want to use. Just Google executive resumes and whatever, you'll see lots of great formats, options there. You need to include those terms at the top because I am then driving the narrative. I'm controlling the filter through which I am seen as a candidate. I'm like, oh,
Like a
I'm the
LinkedIn
merger and
headline.
acquisition guy. Yeah, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, and I love, Johnny, you said something when we were at the Chief Clubhouse in Washington, D.C. a few months ago when we were doing a pop-up event on resumes. And I loved how you just distilled it and you were like, don't put this stuff on your resume that people already know you did. Like if you're already the SVP of sales and you are rewriting your resume to be the chief revenue officer, like you do not need to put on your resume that you led a weekly sales meeting for 350 global staff.
Right.
Like we know that you know how to lead a global meeting.
Yes.
So like, how are you going to talk about your leadership of the global meeting? How are you going to talk about the number of people that you are managed? How are you going to talk about how you made so much money for the company as a P&L leader, right? And I think that especially this is something that I observe and it's something I've written about in my book is like, I think sometimes as women, we take feedback really literally. And like I said, some of us got that message really early in our careers is like stats, metrics on our resume. And I think we're missing, like you said, some of the framing, some of the storytelling of like, not the last big merger that I oversaw, but like storytelling about like why I am such an expert about M&A. I know we've talked about a few do's on our resume, Johnny. I want to talk about leveraging our network. Because so many of the women who are on this call, they're not going to get their next job through a LinkedIn post. They're going to get it through someone in their in-person real life network. But before we do that, I'm curious, Johnny, like we talked about some do's. Do we have any big don'ts for resume?
Yes, your resume should not read like a job description. Your resume should read like your legacy. Okay, so
Ooh, what's the difference?
yeah, so a job description says you're responsible for executing the vision for our company, right? Like, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, I can't. There, I need to know that you were able to have some sort of impact by executing vision. So your legacy needs to say something like, I designed an internal communications campaign to introduce and launch our new branding. This involved, maybe this involved hosting a variety of town halls. Maybe this involved creating special roundtables and focus groups. Like you need to talk about the impacts of how you've done it rather than simply job description speech. That's boring. Yes, you may have been assigned a task, but that doesn't mean you were any good at it. You need to tell them you were good at it.
It's so true. And I think that like that also ties into something. I know you've heard me talk about this so much. So many of the women who come to events hear me talk about this, the difference between being productive and impactful, right? Were you productive in your job or were you impactful in your job? Because, the people who are
Yes.
reviewing your resume, they're, I always feel like they're not thinking about what you did in your last job. They're reading your resume and holding it up as the closest thing they have to a crystal ball to look into the future, into your crystal ball resume and say, can Anna do this job? I'm looking at some of the women here. Can Jenny do this job? Can Whitney do this job? And so I think that all of that is really helpful. Johnny, I wanted to talk about networking. I'm parking lotting some of the other questions that we're getting. So I think I saw you reading through the Q&A. So I will get to those with you in just a second. Before we turn to the next one, I just want to talk about, and it relates to Whitney's question about so many of the jobs that we're going to find, they're not coming through online portals like LinkedIn. They're coming through what my friend Claire Wasserman calls portal people. Whether it is a recruiter, a headhunter, a person in your network. So like, we're going to talk about headhunters in a second and get to Whitney's question. Before we get there, like just zooming out, like when we're so busy and we don't have time to do anything except get through our day. When we're so exhausted and the only thing we want to do is plop down on the couch and watch Real Housewives of New York. And I would like to hear from you in the chat if you are current on this season because the finale blew my mind. What are some of the tips that we can use to activate our network strategically so that they can be an evangelist and a connector for us?
Yeah. So listen, first off, when it comes to activating your network, you need to know what you want first. So many times when I've worked with clients, they, as soon as they got frustrated with their role, they started reaching out to their most connected individuals and saying, ooh, I'd
Yes.
really like to do X. And like, that's great, but then all of a sudden they have 2 sessions with me and they don't want to do X, they want to do Y. Well, you can't go back to that person and be like, actually, I don't want to do X, I want to do Y, because you're asking them to put their neck out for you with their high powered contacts. And if you aren't sure what you want, then I don't feel confident that you won't embarrass me if I recommend you. So you've got to be careful about activating your network before you know what you really want. You've got to anchor down into that, and then you can make the informed ask. That is how we do it. Eliminate the nice to have roles. Let's focus on the things that your gut needs to have, and double down on that.
It's so funny that you say, because I was on the phone with somebody a few weeks ago, super talented person, to the question we got from Anonymous before, like looking for a new job under duress. And I was like, I talk to people all day long. Like, I am the person who you want to know if you're looking for a new job, because I'm talking to everyone. And I was like, what is it that you want to do? How can I help you? She's like, well, I think I like might want to do something in like transformation and ops. And of course, I don't tell that story to say I judged her for having lack of clarity. I tell that story to say, like, I was someone who wanted to help her, who has a Rolodex of contacts, and I didn't know how to assist her.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
I think that, Johnny, like one place where I know that you're really thoughtful with clients on, that I want to kind of like drill down on, is I think that like we have tiers of contacts in our network. My best friends who I do a monthly wine night with, they're the women rather, I can sit on the couch with in my sweatpants and say, guys, I'm so lost. I just know I'm not happy at work. I need something. The mentors who have helped me in my career, they're the people who I can call up and be candid with and say, hey, Bobby, I'm feeling really lost. I've been doing this thing. I feel like it's not playing in my strengths. I could really use a brainstorming session with you. And it's about knowing who you can ask for what. And I think sometimes with the right people in our network, it makes sense to come to them and say, I'm lost. I need your help. I welcome your feedback. I could see myself in different places. But I think where we lose the nuance, and Johnny, sometimes I feel like we have women come to us when like they've already done exactly what you did, activate their best contacts, when they didn't have a game plan. And so I just want to say, like, I want you guys to think about, if you're listening to Johnny speak, who are the people who I can be really, really raw and transparent with? I don't know what I want to do. I have 17 ideas. And who are the people where you need to just pull back a second and say, you know what? I probably have like one bite at the apple of asking Johnny for an introduction. I don't want to over engineer it and get caught in a perfectionism trap, but I also like don't want to ask him to open up his Rolodex unless I know who I really want the connection for.
Right.
And I think like making that distinction, and I know that this is something that you do a lot with one-on-one clients, is like really
Right.
help them like actually go and create a networking plan. The other thing too is, and I want to talk about this, and I want to get to Whitney's question first, but just throwing an idea into the ether that I want to discuss with you is like, I think sometimes as women, we're so afraid of coming off as transactional that we don't even let the people around us know how they can help. Like, I feel like sometimes I go to these women's networking events, whether I'm hosting them, I try to change the dynamic when I'm hosting them so this doesn't happen, or someone else is hosting them. And I meet these amazing women and they're so afraid of being transactional that I walk away and I'm like, I don't even know what you do. I know you run your own business, but I don't know what you do. So I can't even send a client to you. I know you want a new job, but I'm unclear about what it is that you want, and I can't make a strategic connection. Whereas when I know exactly what you want, I can make the connection. Like, I literally once sat next to a woman in a workout class, and in the 5 minutes before class started, she knew exactly what she wanted to do.
Yes.
My friend was the head of HR at the company hiring for her job, and 3 weeks later, she was starting there. So
Right.
like, these are the things that can happen. Besides evangelizing our network, a lot of the women on the call, Whitney's not alone in asking this question, they're working with headhunters. They're being approached by recruiters. What are the best ways that we can work with an executive search firm? What should we expect of headhunters? Any tips there? I know this is something that your clientele deals with a lot.
Yeah. So, all right. So here's the challenge with headhunters. They are working with a large number of positions that they're filling, and they're working with a large number of candidates for every single one of those positions. So the hard truth is you're just a number to them. And we need to just get honest about that and recognize that I am a commodity to a headhunter. And that's just how it is. So the question that we were posed in the chat was, how can you build relationships? Well, you can't. I mean, like, that's not really a typical possibility. I don't want to say you can't, but it's not likely. What you can do is make sure that your resume is selling you effectively so that you become an easier commodity for them to leverage. Because when you are a good candidate, they win. And so help them help you. Get clear on your storytelling, get clear on what your superpowers are, and preach, preach, preach that so that you are the transformation person. You're the operations person. You're the M&A person, right? You're the innovation person. Whatever it is, occupy your little niche as a candidate and make it easy for them to present you. Like, that's the best thing you can do for that.
It's so funny because it's such a different tack than when we think about leveraging our network of relationships with a headhunter. It's almost the opposite. It's like, actually, like, we almost have to acknowledge it is transactional. So like, how do I make myself, because, you know, at the end of the day, like, their interests are about placing the best candidate quickly at the highest value so they can get paid. And I know that there are so many wonderful recruiters out there and headhunters who deeply care about talent. And I don't want them to feel like that's derisive in any way to them, but that is how the incentives are structured. And
Right.
I think that, like, I think it's right. It's important to be like, to wow them in your conversation, to keep them engaged, right? If something awesome happens, forward them a LinkedIn post, tag them, send it to them. I think that LinkedIn is a huge tool we can use to keep our network warm, Johnny. But I know a lot of, like, I'm very comfortable on LinkedIn. And I think everyone on this call who knows me knows. If you're on LinkedIn, there's a good chance I'm going to be I'm probably going to be at the top of your feed today because I'm constantly posting. A lot of us, like, either hate LinkedIn or, like, we don't have time. We feel like it's too late. Like, I didn't build my brand 17 years ago. How can we use LinkedIn to make new connections and keep connections warm, whether they're the awesome boss we had 13 years ago, or we're the recruiter we talked to 2 months ago, who we know is the portal to some great opportunities, but we know we're one of many, many resumes in their portfolio.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think the way to really listen, LinkedIn has, for most people, not the Randy Brauns of the world, for most people, LinkedIn has a relatively low point of diminishing return. So unless you're going to have a fully comprehensive strategy the way you do to leverage LinkedIn and to activate your network, you're going to get very little benefit out of it. Those of us who, like, post once a month, like, it doesn't matter how thoughtful our posts are, we're not going to be able to cash in so much on LinkedIn the way you get to. It just
Can I just say something about that before you continue? This is very important to me. I want to demystify something here. My only strategy on LinkedIn, I know this is exactly what you're getting to. My only strategy on LinkedIn is literally showing up consistently and showing up with my point of view. If you follow my content, you know I talk on LinkedIn like I talk here. If you know me in person, you know the things I post about in LinkedIn are the things that are really happening in my life. They're the articles I'm really reading. So I just want to say, as part of our demystification process, the strategy is be yourself and show up constantly. And I know you're going to build on that. But I don't want anyone here, Johnny, to get the wrong idea that I have some grand, mysterious strategy, because I always joke I have so little strategy sometimes that if you read half my content, spoiler alert, and this is not best practice, a lot of it literally has typos because it came to my mind while I was walking back from the bus. So we typed it up with my thought little thumbs that were not meant to do that much work.
Right. And
that's evolutionarily.
It's a great point. But what I mean is, we all know who you are, because your LinkedIn has painted a 360-degree picture of who you are. For the rest of us, our LinkedIn network probably doesn't know very much about who we are, what we stand for, what we're great at. We don't have that type of presence on LinkedIn that you've
Yes,
cultivated. Okay. And
yes.
I don't have the willingness to do that. Like, it's just, I'm not willing to. I recognize the value of it, but I'm not willing to. So therefore, all I can do on LinkedIn, if I'm not willing to put in the time to create a big presence, then all I can do is try to be of service. When I find helpful articles, I share them. When I have an insight, I might post it. When I see someone successful, I celebrate them. And like that way, the people in my network, when they do see my name, it's associated with positive things. Like that is the entry level benefit of LinkedIn.
Can I just pause you for 1 second there because I want to go deeper here? So what I'm hearing is low stakes, high positivity. And I think, Johnny, I'd love if you would walk us through. I know you have a 3 C's framework for LinkedIn that I find to be really helpful about connecting and things like that. Or if you want to just kind of walk us through just general thoughts on that. But here's the thing, is I genuinely believe that LinkedIn is the easiest thing, and I think this is what you're getting at too, that all of us can do. Like, I try and think about how many people read my content when they are stopped at a red light, when they're zoning out during a meeting, when they're supposed to be getting their kids ready for school and the phone is just so addictive that it's there. I sometimes wonder, I can't believe I'm going to say this on a recorded webinar, how many people have read my content through, right? And so the next time that you're feeling shy about posting something, think about like, how many people are going to read this when they are literally at a red light doing something else? I think that LinkedIn, Johnny, I think that, one of the things I love about your service mentality and that I've heard you talk about so much is that, like, in all of this, like whether it's utilizing your network, whether it's LinkedIn, it's always better to give more than you take.
Yes.
Right? And like, I think that one of the things we forget about on LinkedIn is like, it is so easy, like you said, to celebrate somebody. It is so easy to throw a comment. And I try to think about that whenever I'm on LinkedIn, like how can I amplify? How can I celebrate? How can I engage? It's also just like a warm nudge, right? Like, honestly, like it takes 5 minutes a day to go on and throw a few likes and a few comments. It takes maybe 10 minutes to do that, plus say, here's a great article I was reading, right? Like, so much of it is about just showing up every day. And if I could just be candid as someone who is on LinkedIn and has a lot of visibility to their posts, I think you will be shocked. The things that I almost don't put up are the things that get the most traction. The things where it's like, this is such a brilliant insight. It's like 3 likes. And I'm like, why? So don't stress out about cracking the algorithm.
Yeah.
But think about like being strategic. Any other thoughts on like connection and strategy on LinkedIn?
Yeah. So here's how you do leverage LinkedIn for support in job searching if you don't have a big presence. You can use LinkedIn searches to find individuals who are very niche. And if you reach out to individuals who are niche, let's say they do the role that you're interested in a company that's aspirational for you, you can reach out to that person and say, hey, I found you on LinkedIn. You're part of my network. I'm interested in pursuing a similar career path to you. Would you be willing to having a 15-minute call so that I could ask some questions, because I feel like I don't know what I don't know? And if you place the limit on it, 15 minutes, if you make it easy for them to help you, you increase the odds. Still, there's a lot of people who just will ignore you or who won't respond, but that's how we can leverage LinkedIn. The true power of LinkedIn is in the search capabilities. I can find a chief insurance officer for a Fortune 50, for a Fortune 100, for a Fortune 500. Like I can narrow down my search so precisely and find the person who has what I want, and I can leverage their knowledge if they're willing. So that's how you can really take advantage of it. And I recommend using that search.
I feel like LinkedIn has really like democratized lowercase d so much of this. Like I can tell you honestly, like my husband has been hired from jobs from people he cold reached out to 10 years ago. I can tell you that in the past, like obviously we spend a lot of time talking about warm outreach and we talked a little bit about using our network, but I think this is something in particular that women feel really shy about. And it's not about like, I saw this job was open. I'm a stranger to you. Can you get on the phone and refer my resume? But I think like so much of like building those networking relationships before you need them. And also, of course, like, you know, I mean, you'd be surprised about once a week I get a note from somebody saying, hey, I noticed you're connected to so and so. I'd like to have the exact kind of conversation that Johnny just described. If I know the person, I'm always happy to make the connection. Sometimes I don't know the person that well, and we're connected because it was from a time where you couldn't have a follower default, which is what I have now, versus a connection default. And I would just accept people who heard me speak, right, at a conference. But I think that that's so important. Johnny, we have questions I want to get to. One more kind of like just bucket that I want to hit before we round out the final questions is let's talk a little bit more about interviewing. I think that, you know, we talked a lot about our resume being a story about legacy versus a scoreboard or a job description. We talked about networking being helping paint the vision. We talked about building our brand a little bit online and using online tools in ways that might feel a little less conventional to us. So what I would love to know is what are some do's and don'ts you have during the interview process as someone who has conducted hundreds, probably if not thousands of interviews as an HR professional?
Yeah. Um, One of the richest tools we have at our disposal right now is ChatGPT. And it would be really helpful to go onto ChatGPT and say, you are an interviewer for such and such role within such and such company. You are interviewing someone who has such and such background. What are 20 questions you should ask? Right. And so you get this list of interview questions that can be very, very helpful for you. And then you tap into your inner circle, your friends who you think would have some interview acumen. You give them those questions and you say, please hop on a Zoom with me and ask me these questions and let's record it. Because I promise you, most people think they are smoother at interviewing than they really are. And you will watch those answers you gave to questions that you knew in advance. And you will be like, wow, that was sloppy. Or wow, like I tripped over my words. Or wow, I didn't actually sell myself there. Or wow, there was a lot of fluff, but not a lot of substance. You will be able to identify your blind spots if you watch yourself interview. So this is one of the most valuable things I can recommend you do. You don't have to do an hour long, you know, you can do a 20-minute interview. Just get a trusted friend to do it with you and then rewatch it, take notes, and refine your performance. That is the best advice I can give right now.
So I know that you do a lot of interview prep with people,
Yes.
and I love the suggestion. Again, like this, that's what this is all about. It's about like democratizing these ideas. Like if you come here, now you know how to do this for free with a friend, right? And I know that you also do this with clients. And one of the things I'm curious about is like, you know, as women, I think we're trained to be communicators in a specific way. We're trained to be warm, but we're also trained to be good girls. And I'm curious, where do you think women, high performing women particularly excel naturally in the interview process? You worked with so many high performing women. Where are we natural? I find sometimes it's helpful to go from strength to strength. And so like, what's your hunch about some of the strengths that the women on this call might have as natural interviewers?
I think women are used to putting on a mask because they have to.
Ooh,
You know, so
wow.
I think women have learned to be actors in a way that maybe men haven't been forced to. And so that's something you can use to your advantage. You're able to, how many times have my clients told me about how they were diminished by a comment in a meeting or whatever the case. And like, they can't just flip out and be like, you can't have a strong reaction to that. So I think that's a strength, that you can play your cards close to your chest. And as long as we don't go too far to where we come across as opaque and mysterious, I think that that can be a real strength.
We also observe that we're great storytellers and great connectors. And I think obviously I don't mean to stereotype. There's a lot of really interesting research from women like Angela Duckworth, Dr. Angela Duckworth, about how we're socialized, right? And one of the things I would also say is, like, I would love to just see a +1 from the chat if you self-identify as a people pleaser or someone who's a recovering people pleaser. If you're a people pleaser or a recovering people pleaser. I think, Johnny, I know one of the things that you and I talk about, it's something you work on. No one here is a recovering people pleaser. I literally don't believe you, because I hear from you all the time in my DMs about this topic. And there's a reason why it's like literally the first chapter in my book. But I know, Johnny, that like one of the things you and I talk about is about making sure that we're able to be professional and authentic, that we're able to convey that we have the chops while staying true to ourselves and not just saying all the things that we think they want to hear. Because I think one of the things we forget as women, because we're caught, I think, so much more in this likability trap, is that it's a two-way street. Like, you're sussing me out in the interview. You out in the interview.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, what was that? Yeah, tell me. We're talking about like kind of the recovering people pleaser. What was the question?
No, I was saying it's a two-way street, right? Like, yes. I'm sussing you out.
Yes.
You're sussing me out, right?
Oh,
but
I'm
also sussing you out. It's a two-way street.
Absolutely. You know what I mean? And I think that it's important. One of the things that I've learned as I've coached people is that if I don't pay attention to taking care of my needs during an interview as well, then I end up with a midlife crisis. Like, that's what happens. I need to really be allowing this company to audition for me through the interview process. If the interview feels aggressive, if the company culture feels cold, maybe that's what I need. Maybe that's what fits me. If it's not, then maybe the most loving thing for me to do for myself is to keep looking until I find evidence of a culture that feels more harmonious with mine.
I'm so glad that you said that, because it's about being harmonious. And I also think that, the interview is a great window into like what the culture is going to be. I was talking to a very senior executive the other day who was really excited about this company. They had 3 rounds of interviews, and this makes sense. It's a very senior job, but it's certainly like not the tip top most job. And then they wanted this person to come in and meet with another 6, 7 people, and it was basically going to be the same interview again and again and again. And this person actually got cold feet, and they were like, this is kind of striking me as a place where like it's going to be really bureaucratic, like that there's going to be a lot of red tape, that no one can make a decision.
Right.
And they actually ended up it was like a gut instinct thing, taking themselves out of the running. They were like, this just from a culture fit doesn't feel right.
Exactly.
Okay. We have 9 minutes left, and I have a few things I want to wrap up with on the end. So, Johnny, we are going to lightning round some final questions. We're going to get to as many as we can. Please keep putting them in the Q&A. Number 1, when we are kind of like quote unquote starting over, how much should we expect to start over? Like, are we going from being vice president to being like the junior assistant if we're starting? Like, we get this question a lot. Like, I want to start over. What should my expectations be if I'm starting over in a new career, new industry, et cetera? What can I advocate for myself?
I'm not here to tell anyone what's right for them, but here's what I've learned in my own journey. When I get hung up on titles, when I get hung up on numbers, sometimes I miss fulfillment. And so what I like to anchor in is fulfillment. What roles will fulfill me? And if I follow that, it doesn't mean that my money doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that my title doesn't matter. There needs to be equity there. There needs to be fairness. but anchor in fulfillment. That is where life feels nurturing.
And that's a great, I think if no one takes away anything else today except that, then this is an hour well spent, because like this is about fulfillment. Johnny, another question we have. If I'm older, right? I'm not 10 years into my career. I'm 20, 25, maybe 30 years into my career. Could be my next act, my last act. Maybe I didn't plan for it that way. What tips, especially if I'm super experienced,
Yes.
and maybe even facing a little bit of ageism, what
Mhm.
tips do you have for helping women thrive in making that pivot?
Reverse engineer yourself into that position. What matters to the company? What matters to the person who's interviewing me? Let me really do a deep dive before I'm interacting with these individuals into what's going to resonate with them. And then when I am in contact with them, give them what they need. Like that is the most effective tool you can have to neutralize any type of bias that you might uncover. If you give people what they need, they're more willing to welcome you in.
We had a follow-up question from Marianne, which was, do companies keep, about the starting over question, and then we're going to get to a question about confidence. Do companies keep track of positions people apply for? Can it backfire to apply for a position that I'm overqualified for if I'm going to apply for something else in the future? You've worked at very big companies, global companies. What's the truth on this?
So they don't really keep a lot of track, of that thing. I mean, if you apply to multiple positions in a short period of time, they may pick out your name as like, wait, what's going on with Johnny? Like, why is he applying to 3 different roles that aren't even similar? That's weird. But in general, no, big corporations don't keep track of that. Can it backfire to apply for a position that you're overqualified for? Yes. So if you are making a pivot that justifies you dropping down a notch or 2 in seniority, then you just need to explain that. This is one of the rare experiences where a cover letter is helpful, or some other type of communication, so that they don't think it's weird. That's all.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to take this final question and do a quick wrap up. Before we do that, we want to invite you to be part of our wrap up. I'd love to hear from you in the chat. What is one thing you are taking away from here? Something you learned, something you're going to try, a tip, something that surprised you. While we wait for that to come in the chat, let's take one more question. Great. Johnny, this is my favorite one to end on. What are some great tools for building confidence after you feel like you've been in a work slump and haven't been performing your best? You go first and I'm going to go.
Okay, so when I need to feel confident, I like to think back to my most amazing work memories, and I anchor into that moment. I bring myself back to that moment of power when someone I respected came and patted me on the back, or when I got a really high performance evaluation in the past, because I'm still that powerful person. And I still have access to all of those same resources that I did back then, and I can choose to use them now.
Love that. I think that's definitely something that I practice and I'll offer too. Number one is I love to celebrate like the small wins. Like, did I do something that wasn't the big, like some of you have heard me talk about treating goals like a fine wine versus a keg stand. Like, we don't want to guzzle on things. We want to like sip and savor. I know Johnny's not a drinker, but he's heard me use the metaphor before. And I think about like, what is the smallest thing I could raise a metaphorical or a literal glass of champagne to in my life? And it's counterintuitive, but one of the best things I love to do is to like step away, is to rest, to have a meaningful recharge. We got like a really, really great question. Johnny, if you have 30 seconds to answer it, and then I'm going to wrap us up.
Yeah, the looking for work.
Yes or no? Yeah, well, yes or no to the open to work banner on LinkedIn?
If you're earlier in your career, it's fine. If you're later in your career, it doesn't matter. You don't need it, so don't use it.
Awesome. Okay. I want to share really quickly for people who want to keep the conversation going with you. Yes. You are welcome to reach out to Johnny anytime on LinkedIn, or we can share his email and follow up. But for those who are interested, Johnny does have a coaching cohort called Pivot with Power and Purpose that's kicking off on February 26th. We are going to talk about everything from clarifying your career path to building your resume, your interview, your networking. It's a fabulous, fabulous mix of a group coaching cohort. It meets at night so that when you're busy during the day, you don't have to quote unquote carve out the time. And it includes lots of individual personalized coaching. So it's the best of being in a group, connecting with other women who are going through all the same things at the same time, and getting that one-on-one time with Johnny. Even if you don't think the cohort's a good fit for you, if you want to connect with Johnny anytime, if you want to connect with any of us, please feel free to reach out. If you are interested in the program, there's an early bird special that goes through the end of the week. And if you also just even want to talk to Johnny and see if it's a good fit for you, we invite you to reach out. He's always happy to chat. I'm always happy to chat. Speaking of the chat, I do want to close out with some of the things, Johnny, that people said they're taking away. People said they love the tips. Mandy says she loves finding my fulfillment and centering on that. We got our resume should be a legacy, not a job description. This idea of legacy resonated with Linda. Jessica says ensuring I have a clear personal brand. A defined goal, especially if you're a generalist, someone who actually is a jack of all trades. And Johnny, I hear this a lot from clients. My experts think generalists have it better, and my generalists think experts have it better. And it's really about who can tell the better story. Em just says, thank you for an inspirational webinar. She says, focusing exactly on what I'm looking for and also how to leverage my network effectively.
Yes.
We want to inquiry for your coaching services. So please feel free to follow up on us after. Marianne, we're happy to share that information with you. I genuinely want to thank every single woman who came here today. Our time is so precious. Johnny, I want to thank you as well. It's such a joy to work with you. You have so much brilliance on this topic, and I love the way that you share it in a way that's so supportive. I hope every single person left here feeling like, number one, getting a new job feels more doable. Number two, the process that companies hire you by is a little more demystified. And number three, feeling motivated and empowered. I'm a huge believer that sip and savor mentality, that our big goals happen one email, one decision, one conversation at a time. And so if you just take 1% out of every day, which by the way is only 15 minutes, to focus on this, to practice one tool from Johnny, I know that you are going to have a new job by the time we see you again, and please keep us posted. Thank you again, Johnny. Thank you everyone who joined us. We'll send out the recording. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Let's connect on LinkedIn.